Welcome back to Compensation Matters, where we explore the intricacies and innovations in the world of compensation. I'm your host, Nilufar Datta, and today we will learn how to transform the spreadsheets into smart compensation tools. In our previous episode, we discussed why working in compensation often feels like running on a high speed treadmill without a stop button. And we also covered some low cost strategies to help organizations of any size to slow down the pace of this treadmill and increase efficiency. Today, we're excited to have Anne Soash back with us, and she will walk us through a practical tutorial that will help us take the next step in improving our compensation administration process. And it's great to have you back. I recently came across a survey that said more than 60% of organizations right now are leveraging some sort of incentive compensation management tool, which shows a growing trend towards automation. You worked with a lot of manual and automated tools. In your experience, when should an organization consider migrating to an automated tool?
In a way, it's actually easier to define when an automated tool is not needed. For instance, if it's a small incentive plan, say around 50 participants, with a minimal number of metrics and pretty straightforward calculations, it is totally fine to get by using Excel and or Google Sheets. Also, another example is if it's a brand new incentive plan, oftentimes it's just not worth it to configure it in a more automated tool until you know that the plan is definitely sticking around and that the design is really stable and there won't be a lot of changes. Other than that, if you can, I definitely recommend using incentive compensation management tools. It gives employees the pay transparency into how they're being paid, and it helps save actually a lot of time on processing the payouts as well.
Mm-hmm. To your point, most of the organization, they begin their incentive compensation system in homegrown solutions like Excel. But as companies grow, so do those Excel sheets. And if they're not maintained properly, they can quickly become messy and very difficult to manage. How was your experience with such solutions, and did it affect your team and the organization as a whole when you decided to migrate to a new technology?
Yeah, so one organization I work with actually had 18 homegrown tools where the technology teams themselves had developed semi-automated solutions, we'll call them. We also had one small area using a third-party incentive compensation management system, and then several areas were also using Excel at this large organization. When we took a look at it and we added up the costs, both from the technology perspective and the people process to run all of these tools, it was massive. And it actually helped us make a great business case for moving to one third-party incentive compensation management platform. One of the hard parts about the migration was managing the ones that were in Excel and moving them to an automated technology, as we essentially had to reverse engineer the spreadsheets as we've never captured requirements for them before. And oftentimes they had been around for a long time. It was smaller groups that had been around for a long time, and the spreadsheet had just kind of been handed down across, different employees over time to manage the plan. Other parts of this migration, were difficult from a standpoint of there was a large number of incentive plans, and then with all these different incentive tools that we had to gather requirements from, it really extended the roadmap for implementation. And ultimately, I've actually seen it with a couple different companies where implementations can take up to 8 years. And so the more you can get your incentive foundation solidified before taking on that project, the easier it will go as you work through the process.
That seems like a very long time to do for a migration process. For those who prefer to use homegrown solutions like Excel or Google Docs, what can they do today with their current system to make sure their compensation system will remain manageable over time and they won't face like 8 years period of migration in the future.
Yeah. So setting up your manual process with a very structured approach, like we'll go through today, will save you an immense amount of time and reduce errors. In essence, once it is set up, the comp admin will simply copy and paste their data into the Excel spreadsheet on the specific tabs that we'll show you, and the calculations automatically happen without manual intervention, including creating the form to send to payroll to ensure that the employees are all paid accurately.
Sounds great. So, what is required from the team or leadership to implement this approach successfully?
So, very similar to what we talked about in episode 1, it starts with leadership buy-in. They need to understand, the reason behind it and make sure that they can free up capacity for somebody on the team to really dive into it and start solving the issues. In terms of the resource skill set, once again, you need, strong Excel or Google Sheet knowledge and strong incentive compensation knowledge so that you can work through the calculations and make sure everything is accurate.
Sounds good. Let's say everything is in place. Where should we start?
All right. The first step as you're going to improve your process is you need to make sure you understand your incentive plan that you're going to be putting into the template. For our purposes, I've mocked up an incentive plan that's fairly simple, and it's important you understand it and so that you can actually see how this goes into the template and the calculations work so then you can modify it for your own purposes. So in this incentive plan, we have a customer survey score that is paid out with a very simple grid. So customer survey score of 7 gets $150. And then it starts to get a little more complicated when you get to sales units sold. There's 2 products that are added up for a total. So in this case, 15 of product A, 17 of product B for 32 products. And then it's a progressive payout grid. So for units 1 through 9, you get $5 per unit sold. So that's the $45. For units 10 through 29, you get $10 sold per product sold. And then for the products above 30, you get $15. From there, you add up the customer experience payout and the sales payout to get the $440 before looking at the quality modifier. The quality modifier in this case gives you an additional 25% on your payout if you score 100. And this employee example, they got a perfect quality score. And so their total payout is $550. So there's a little bit of the background on how the incentive plan works before we jump into the actual template and how to take this incentive plan and make it in a really structured process that's easy to handle every month when doing the payouts. So before we jump into the detailed demo, I want to give you a high-level view of how the calculation template works. And as a reminder, we'll actually have a link to this template so you can take it and use it for your own needs and try to set it up for your incentive plans. So there's a requirements tab where you're actually capturing the requirements of how things work, because then you can use that in the future if you want to automate. There's also a procedures tab so that, let's say you win the lottery and you quit your job. Well, somebody needs to know how to run this calculation template. So written procedures right there embedded in the template. And so you can keep going on, even if the person that knows how everything works leaves the company. From there, there's going to be some data tabs. Obviously, this would have to be customized depending on the incentive plan. But for our example that we looked at, bringing in that employee data, sales data, customer experience data. And then there's a payout calculator where it's taking all that data and calculating it. And then the payroll submission form to make sure that you do not have to do any manual manipulation in order to then send that final result off to payroll.
Awesome. So it sounds like we're ready to dive into the template. But before that, for those of you who are listening on the go, as Anne mentioned, we will include the link to the template and also the full demo in the description of this video. And let's start the demo.
All right, now we're going to walk through the Excel file, which is a sample of what this would look like to really give you an idea how it would work, how to set it up, and we'll actually share this file with you so you can use it as a starting point for your organization to try to really optimize the process using Excel. So we will screen share. Okay, coming up. Okay, so you can see the Excel file here. You could also do this in Google Sheets. Some things might be slightly different, but definitely possible. So you can see we have quite a few tabs on the bottom. And we'll start here with the requirements tab. So this you really want to fill out as you begin building it, and so that you're very clear on the requirements of what needs to be built. So starting with data sources. Where do the data sources come from? Who's the main contact if something goes wrong? Basic information like that's really important to capture. And then below that are all the calculation requirements. Now that you have the data, what do you do with it? This is one of the best things you can do is really take your time on this, make sure everything in the plan document that says it's going to be calculated a particular way is then reflected in here as a requirement. And then you build it out through the calculations. When you move to automating a tool, this is a great starting point, truly will give you a head start on working through requirements for an automated tool if you already have this captured. The next tab is procedures. So once this is all finished, you want to make sure somebody can run it and it doesn't have to be you, and they know how to do it. So typically I would build this out after I build out everything else. So we'll come back to this. Grids. So this is where you capture, the parameters for the incentive plan that could change. Sometimes these change quarterly, hopefully not too often. But definitely at least annually. They could be employee level goals. You could really, you could modify this if you have employee level goals to incorporate that. But this is the data that's then used across the board to calculate the individual's pay. All the yellow tabs are where you would paste in your data from your data sources. One thing we've built in to really error-proof this is that, you would copy in your data with the column headings. And if you paste it in and a column heading doesn't match, like we have here in C4, the column heading, which you already had in there as part of the template, lights up in yellow. Typically, what I've found is once you get your calculation process really solid, the errors that come into the incentive payouts really come through data sources and somebody changing your data source without telling you. One way to know that they changed the data source is if they change the number of columns, and this would actually tell you. So you can see now if I type in first name, boom, it goes away, and it's not lit up in yellow anymore. But if we change it back to test, there we go. So just some conditional formatting at use there that's across all these column headers here in row 3. All right, and throughout our demo today, we have just one employee included in the sample data to really keep it simple. And so you'll see her data on each of the different tabs. Clearly as you adopt this and, adapt it truly for your organization, your column headings will be different. They'll have a different number of columns. And so, you can adjust this as appropriate. In this case, the incentive plan does need to know whether or not the individual is a new hire. And so added in a new hire calculation here at the end. And anything in gray, I kept as it's truly a calculation. It's part of the template. Nothing you would need to change as you're calculating payouts at the end of each pay cycle, as that would already be pre-built. Next tab, customer survey. Same deal, except for here you can see we have multiple rows for each, for the same employee ID because they have multiple surveys coming in throughout the month. Same with product A, product B, quality. If you have exception payouts, Let's say in this case, you're doing some sort of contest and they get an extra $100. You can put that information in here. I always recommend putting in who the approvers are and any approval documentation. You could actually embed right in here. So you have a full audit trail of why their payment is different than what the incentive plan document says. So those are the easier tabs to get set up, right? Just make sure you get the right column headings, the right number of tabs. You may need to add tabs, you may need to delete tabs. And then you get to the part that's a little more complex. So I have all of this grayed out because truly, when somebody goes to process incentive plan payments, they should not have to change anything on this tab, as all the data will automatically filter in and calculate. And so I have it grayed out so that they would know not to touch it. I would also recommend locking down this worksheet and so that they can't change the calculation, because you don't want somebody to accidentally overwrite something. And that would really, truly protect it and make sure that they can't change it so that the calculation comes out as expected. So this is just starting to pull in from that employees tab. It's actually just pulling in the first row of data from the employees tab. You can see pretty simple across to just pull in that first row. Where it starts to get complex is when you start to get into some of the metric calculations. So in this case, customer survey, the customer survey as defined in the requirements tab is only based on one of the questions, not all of the questions. And so I used there's the average score across all the surveys for that employee on that question. So I used an average ifs calculation. So you will need to get pretty savvy with Excel calculations, but I have some built in here, for example, here. But essentially, this calculation is saying it's going to average all the scores in column F on the customer survey tab. And then it's going to look at column B on the customer survey tab and make sure it matches B5. So make sure it matches the employee ID 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's how it's calculating the 7. It's also bringing in that new hire flag from that line that we looked at there. And then it is calculating the payout. If it was a new hire, it would actually reduce the payout by half. And as per the requirements. In this case, they're not a new hire. And so the customer survey will actually look at the score 7 and go to that grid. All right, so let's just go over to grid. It's going to look up 7 on the grid, and it's going to award that payout amount, which is $150. And that's what it is bringing back. All right. One thing that's really important to note here is that normally I'd never use true in VLOOKUP equations because that's an approximate match versus false being an exact match. When you're looking items up on payout grids where you want it greater than or equal to that number, you want to use true, because if this customer survey was an 8, we go back over to the grids, 8, you'd still want it to come out to 150. And so by using true, it actually does still capture that 150, even if it's 8 or even if it's 7.5 as an average. Next, it comes in and calculates the payout. So here we're using some ifs, and we're looking at the total count of product A for this employee, the total count of product B for this employee, adding those two together to get the total sales count of 32. Then it's calculating the payout. So this is a more complicated payout calculation, as it is progressive, meaning that units 1 through 9 all get paid $5. Whether you only sold 8 units or 50 units, the first 9 units there get paid $5. Then for anything, unit 10 through 29, you get paid $10 per unit. So even if you make it to 50, it's not like all 50 units get paid at $20. Only the 50th unit would get paid at $20. And so that's why the calculation is a lot more complex, as it's calculating how much they get paid at this level, at this level, at this level, depending on where they hit on the grid. So you can see multiple calculations, if-then statements, calculating that. Let me get to our subtotal here. Pretty simple. Just adding up customer survey and sales. Get to the quality score, which is calculated at 100 based on the requirements for how quality score is calculated, which leads to a modifier of 25% from that grid that we were looking at. And then here's the exception payout that comes in at $100 for a total payout of $650. So if you had 20 employees and you dropped the data for 20 employees into these yellow tabs, you would see 20 employees listed here with their payouts calculated without you having to intervene once you get this template set up. Another nice feature to have is a payroll tab. So you would want to look at, the requirements of your payroll submission. What data do they need on that payroll submission file? Make sure you have all those columns captured here. Kept it really simple for this purposes, but you can add columns as needed and have all that information entered here. So literally whoever is submitting payroll can just take this information, submit it to payroll without having to do any manual intervention. I mean, if anything, it's, copy, paste values of the data. But you really want to make sure they're not transforming data. They're not adding columns. It's all there, ready to go. And then one final tab, it's always good to have some sort of incentive view for the employees. Definitely fancy it up from here. This is a pretty basic one, but you need to find a way to communicate this out so employees understand how much they're being paid and why they're being paid that, so they can verify that it is accurate. And so you can see it says employee statement for Jane Doe at the top. If you had multiple employees in here, you could actually, use this drop down. This pulls in everybody from the employee ID tab and switch between individuals. But it brings in all of her information. It brings in her payout calculations, brings in her customer survey results so she can see how she did on those, as well as the product sales, the quality result, and the exception information. It's really important that they have that full view of how they're being paid. All right. So before you, really get started with this process, like once you have the template built in, you have all the right calculations in there, it's really important then to go back to the procedures tab. Capture this data, like what's the date it's last updated, list of items you updated. So, initially it's going to be built it from scratch, added everything in. But over time, the goal is to only have to change this template when the incentive plan design changes. And so, initially you have somebody test this template and, you delete all the sample data, then save it as a template, and you don't touch any of the calculations. All you do is drop the data in and get the incentive payouts. But then next time there's incentive design change, you would come in, state what changes you're making to the template as compared to the last one. So you kind of have a paper trail. Save it as a new template in case you ever had to go back and calculate something in the old incentive process. In case some errors found, maybe the data source was wrong, right? You have to go back, use the old calculation template. So save this as a new template. Again, have somebody test it, have them make sure everything is working accurately, all the calculations work. Save it. I recommend protecting all the tabs, only unlocking the cells, which you can do through format cells, just to leave cells unlocked where they need to be pasting data in. Other than that, have everything else locked down. And then you want to build your procedures with the first step in everybody's procedure being save as, right? Open the template, save as a new file for that particular pay period. So you don't want to save over the template. You want to save it as a file for that particular pay period, and then start the process of getting all the information in there. Really important from a business continuity standpoint. What if you win the lottery? Somebody else had to run this incentive process, but they know how to do it. It should be really simple and straightforward directions here to allow them to do it. It also enables you to be able to go on vacation too, right? Oh, that's end of the quarter. Incentive processing has to happen, but you have good procedures that allow somebody else to take it over while you go on vacation. So A lot of great benefits there. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed the demo and you could understand how to set it up for yourself. Some keys to success to make sure you keep in mind is you really want to minimize and truly eliminate manual manipulation of the data and the calculations. You want to make sure you error-proof the process, such as how we did with the column headers lighting up yellow if the column header that you're bringing in for the data does not match what was expected to be there. And another key is really you need to make sure you're communicating these results to employees for review. You can use mail merge. There's a few different options. It's not as easy as an automated tool, but it's definitely still a key piece to success.
Um, and one of the crucial steps that we help most of our clients with is testing at different stages to make sure everything is working as it is expected. What are the best practices for testing in this setup?
Definitely need somebody other than the person who built the template to do the testing. And you want to run through the calculations end to end to make sure everything's accounted for, including in different situations like those leave of absences or a new hire or termination, to make sure those unique scenarios are calculating accurately according to the plan document. And in terms of the number of calculations to test, it depends a little bit on the size of your population. 30 is always statistically significant in terms of a number. But if you have a smaller group, you could get away with, testing 10 calculations end to end if necessary.
Mm-hmm. This template seems like an excellent starting point. What would you say is the most challenging part of maintaining it?
The most challenging part is really ensuring that you have the time and the skill set and resources to update it every time the plan design changes, as it is almost like a mini technology that you're going to go in and update the calculations and then have to retest it, and also make sure those requirements and procedures are updated every time as well.
Mm, sounds good. So, for our listeners who are under tight payout deadlines, what is the best way that they can benefit this template?
Starts with working with your leadership in terms of how can you free up the capacity of a resource to help build this template out. Once you get the template complete and tested, you find relief so quickly. It's amazing, but it is so important to have that leadership buy-in to make sure that you can really focus on it and get it done correctly.
Sounds good. And you worked in the financial and banking industry, in fact, in one of the largest organizations in the industry. How was your experience with compensation management and implementing this approach in the past?
Yeah, so incentive compensation can be very messy, especially if it's handled in separate areas across the company. So when I joined this company, incentives were managed in about 15 different areas. And it led to a lot of inconsistencies and inefficiencies. Over time, we started to create a consistent incentive foundation of governance and plan design, as well as centralizing the incentive admin teams. And when we centralized those teams, we uncovered the cost to run all of these systems and was able to build that strong business case to get a third party system. It truly, the journey never ends, but it's amazing how much progress you can make as you start focusing time and resources on this effort. You can really start to compound the effects for the team.
It sounds like a very interesting journey, and I'm very excited that we can dive into the details of it in our next episode. Thank you so much, Anne, for your invaluable insights, and thank you all for being here today. Don't forget to download your copy of the template in the description below. And if you're a large enterprise looking to acquire a solution like SBM, or you're already using one but you're facing challenges, you're not satisfied with your results, join us in our next episode. We will cover strategies for overcoming plan design and system design challenges in your SPM solutions. Have a great day.